Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this episode of LinkedIn Live series. Today, we have an extremely passionate topic on why can't IT survive without business relationship management. Now, I'm pretty excited. I'm your host, Suresh GP from TaUB Solutions. We do this every 2 weeks, and it's a great opportunity and honor to have Jeff Warren, the president of Barkley Consulting, join us today and share his wisdom about why IT can't live without BRM. So, thanks, Jeff, for taking time, and I hope you're doing well and staying safe.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Suresh. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So before we kind of get started, why don't you give our viewers, you've been very well known in the industry, but for people who are joining in, tuning in from various parts of the world, just give us a little bit of background about your journey and what has been your passion around BRM.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So, as I tell everyone, I'm an IT lifer. I started my career out, I was a COBOL programmer on an IBM 360 mainframe with punch cards a long time ago, which really dates me, of course. But I thought I was going to be technical my whole life. But I followed the career path that most people do in IT. I eventually managed some teams. And then eventually headed up application development for a large Fortune 500 company. And I just saw IT from the inside looking out, and I thought we were a powerhouse and that the world saw things the way we did and we were making a difference. Um, and around 2005 or so, a CIO called me into his office and said he wants me to start this thing called BRM. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "It's business relationship management." And I said, "Well, what's that?" Which is another conversation about the name. And he started to explain to me, if we're going to be a strategic organization within this company, we've got to be closer to our business units. So we started the BRM program. I wasn't happy about it at the time because I thought I was going to be technical. I was very unhappy, actually. And
Sure.
I think it turned out to be the best move of my career. And what was really interesting about building a BRM program from scratch, and this was long before there was a BRM Institute or any consultants or guidelines,
Sure.
was we actually worked so close with our business units, we got to see IT from the outside looking in. And so when you're inside of IT, you're in this cocoon where you think everything is just moving perfectly and everybody understands why things aren't happening or why they are. But when you're on the outside looking in, you see how sometimes disconnected and misguided IT can be. And also you can see the potential IT can have on an organization. So built the program there. Love to tell you everything went perfectly, but it didn't. We made a ton of mistakes,
Right.
which is why I got to be a consultant in the industry. But mistakes people are afraid of mistakes when in fact, when you make them, it actually makes you stronger and you learn from them. And the program is still going on at my old company right now and is, from what I understand, a very strong one still. And so about 8 years ago or so, I started my own consulting practice in this space and work with a lot of clients, enjoy speaking at conferences, talking to organizations about the real power that BRM can have and how it can help IT. And I developed my own class called the High Performing BRM that teaches new BRMs and veterans not only how to do BRM, but how to do it at a really high level, because I've seen some really top performers in this industry. So that's me. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm looking forward to the topics today.
Excellent, Jeff. And people who are dialing in from different parts of the world, can you just post on the comment section from where you're dialing? Thanks, Shelly Bowman is joining from Washington, D.C. Great to hear from you a lot. A lot of our viewers are regular viewers. They come in to attend these sessions. We would love to hear from where you're dialing in and what's your questions with Jeff. So, Jeff, why don't you kind of kick us off on the an overview of the BRM and what do you want to kind of take us through? And then we'll have a lot of questions, but I wanted to kind of give you the start to see how we can, take this forward.
Yeah. So, like I said, when I started BRM, I wasn't happy about doing it, and I thought it was just such a simple job because I was seeing it as what I think many people in IT see it as is a liaison between IT and the business. And every time I speak to a client, I always tell them to strike that word from their vocabulary.
Right.
BRM is not a liaison. If you want a liaison, to put somebody between IT and business partners, just put somebody in as a clerk. You don't need anything more than that.
Sure.
But if you truly want to do BRM, if you truly want to be a strategic business partner, you really want to put somebody in this role. You want to build an organization that is going to be a true strategic partner.
Right.
And I mean this much more in action than I do in words, because a lot of organizations talk about how they're strategic partners and they're technical advisors and they're, they have these build big relationships, when the reality is they're none of those things. They really put BRM in as order takers. Right. I see that much more as the rule than the exception. And so when I see the power that BRM can have, when I see how it can affect an organization, how it can influence business strategies and influence IT strategies, when it finds opportunities that just won't be found unless you have somebody there that's actually looking, when I see the ability for BRMs to truly understand business operations, goals, directions, challenges, and translate back to IT how IT can affect those, I get really passionate about the role. And I do that. And, I'm speaking at the BRM Connect conference in Portland this year on the topic. I speak every year. I think they're tired of hearing about me talking about this by now. But one of the things that really frustrates me in the BRM space is that, people are satisfied with just being good. There was John Rockefeller had a quote that said, "Don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great." Right. And a lot of times BRM organizations and BRMs are just satisfied with value plans and shaping demand. And that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just scratching the surface of what BRM can do. Sure. And when you really can bring that to an organization, the effect it has not only on IT or the business partner, but the entire organization is magical, because it affects, like I said, strategies, investments, how technology is being used, how it's understood. I do a lot of work with organizations where I assess BRM programs. And one of the things that I do when I start that is I ask to please talk to business leaders without the client on the call, just me and them.
Sure.
And one of the things I hear from business leaders so often is, I don't think IT has any idea what we do. I mean, they know we're a sales organization, but they don't know how we work. They don't know what we do. They don't know what we're facing. And yet they keep throwing solutions at us. And I think that is very symptomatic of a lot of IT organizations now, that they think they know what everybody wants. They think they know what everybody needs. And therefore, they just keep throwing solutions without truly understanding not only how they work, but how can they improve what they're doing. It's such a missed opportunity for IT organizations. And it's something that BRM can really, really influence.
And I like the way that you said, because it's not just about doing good, but to go to great, which means that it actually dovetails to your high performance BRM, right? Because don't be contented with you have played an infinite game, to go there and do great, right? And it's also, you and I were talking about what motivates us is just about creating an impact, right? We have a mission to kind of impact people around the world. And you've been, as I'm told, Jeff is making his way to New Zealand, to the other side of the Pacific tomorrow. And that just means that there's so much work to be done. That's great. So let's look at a couple of the people who have joined in from different parts. We had Shelley joining us from Washington. We have Jack joining us all the way from UK. We have another user from Atlanta. We have Kathy joining us with Charlotte, a great place in. We have Tez, great to see Tez from Tulsa. We have Rachit Gandhi from Vadodara, Gujarat. We have Keith Stolt from Michigan. We have Mark Jackhaman from Austin, Texas. We have Asif Qureshi from Pune, India. You had been to Pune, right? I mean, you have been into India and in some parts, Jeff, before?
I've actually never been to India. All these years in IT, I don't know how I skipped it, but I've never been to India.
Then I think you should put that in your map for your remaining times to do that. Chris joining from city of Austin, Texas. We have Elena joining from Brazil. So there's a lot of people coming. Nick Penn joining us from Canada. So you see, these people are just loving to hear from you. So let's get started off from my first question. Now, as we start to see some of those BRM roles and things, we seem to be very focused on IT. So is that BRM roles predominantly becoming IT BRMs, or do you see BRMs in other functions as well? Because we still seem to have a struggle between looking at, is it going to be an IT BRM, or we have finance, HR, BRM? So what is your take on this whole spread in terms of their profiles as a BRM?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So let's not fool ourselves. BRM came from IT, and that is where the vast majority of BRM is and will
Sure.
be. It's a natural fit. It's a huge role. There is, traditionally such a disconnect between IT organizations and their business partners in many organizations. I mean, there's some that they're not, but for the most part, there's a big disconnect and a huge amount of translation and discovery that can happen. So the vast majority of this happens in IT. With that said, I've had a lot of conversations with the people in the BRM Institute, with Aaron Barnes, and most recently with Daryl Popowich,
Yeah.
around this. And, the question becomes, what is a BRM? When I was in private industry, my organization worked very closely with HR business partners for many years, 20 years ago.
Right.
It just isn't a formal BRM program or function as we know it. And so it's a hard question to answer. In terms of formal BRM programs as we know it, I don't see a lot outside of IT.
Sure.
They may be there. I don't see them. And I'm not hearing a lot about that.
Sure.
But that's the formal BRM program. When you think about the roles that are playing BRM, if you will, or filling that BRM role, not playing them, there's probably a lot more than we think about. So if you take HR and you think about how many organizations have HR business partners, there's quite a few.
Right.
And so I would say when you're looking at this concept, there's quite a bit. When you're looking at just the formal programs, I think it's primarily from IT.
Sure. Right. So we have got, again, people from all over Nigeria, Africa, and stuff. So it's great. So kick us off in terms of telling, you have a bold title that says, "Why can't IT survive without BRM?" Right. So when I was just posted out this one, and remember we had this conversation when we are freezing our title, but that is actually why a lot of people are keen. Now, IT has been running this shop for a long period of time, right? We have been focused on looking at technology. Today, technology is the center of any kind of transformation. Now, a lot of times BRMs seem to be getting fizzled out. Where do you really fit into the overall scheme of things? So from your perspective, whether a company is very strategic in nature, or they're just looking at legendary wake of traditional work, where do you see the role fitment of the BRM in the IT operating model?
Yeah. So first off, on the title of "Why Can't IT Survive Without BRM?" I don't know if you noticed, but there's a wine cooler over my
Yeah,
shoulder
yeah,
here, and there's a couple of bottles missing. I might have had a few when I put that's a little strong.
yeah.
But actually, I do believe that. And survival doesn't mean that IT won't exist without BRM. It just means survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about growth. It's about impact. It's about just like our own personal lives, about becoming bigger and better than we are today. And that's what I think IT needs BRM to be able to do that. So where it fits in the IT operating model is a really interesting conversation and question. Every organization that I speak to, and I'm often speaking to the CIO and C-level executives about BRM initially, it is my complete belief and statement that for BRM to be successful, to really make the impact that you want it to, and to really fulfill its promise, it needs to report directly to the CIO completely.
Right.
I mean, 100%. A lot of times I see it down one level because it's just the way the model's set up with the number of direct reports for a CIO. That's fine as long as it has a tremendous amount of influence into the leadership discussions and meetings. When it's buried really far in an organization, it leads to so many missed opportunities and so much tremendous frustration on the part of the BRMs. Because when you have BRMs who are in this organization, in any organization, and they start uncovering the things they're uncovering and seeing what they can do, and then they're being told to just chase down tickets or manage projects or write specs,
Right.
the level of frustration is incredibly high.
Right.
And so, from a positioning perspective, BRM really can and should be making the influence it can only by reporting into the decision makers in the organization. Why doesn't that happen a lot? It's because nobody understands truly what BRM can do. And whenever I talk to organizations, I always hear they don't really understand what we do. And I always ask one question: have you shared your strategy with them? And the answer I get back a lot is, well, we don't have a strategy.
Right.
Well, BRM is not a traditional construct within IT. It's not something, when IT started, there was application development, infrastructure, security, architecture. There's nothing called BRM when IT started. And so it's not a traditional construct. And therefore, when you start something up, nobody understands what you can do. How do you blame them for using you to do the things that you're being asked to do, which again is, buying laptops, installing software, testing, chasing down tickets. When I was on the application development side of my company, and if somebody started BRM, that's how I would use them, because nobody's told me otherwise.
Right.
So it's really the fault and the onus lies on the BRM groups to be able to tell their story properly, and identify what BRM is, what it does, what it doesn't do,
Right.
how it measures success, the impact it can make, how it interacts with business partners in IT, and most importantly, how does this fit in to the fabric of IT? How do you weave it into the fabric? Because remember, I told you when we started the BRM program, we made a ton of mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes, I just assumed this was going to work well with IT, and we never integrated it back into IT. And as such, there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of people going around the BRM, multiple people talking to business partners about the same thing. And we kind of realized that this wasn't going to work unless we wove it into the fabric of the IT operating model. So one of the suggestions I would have for anybody that's building a BRM program is, number one, first and foremost, write your strategy. Don't just have it up in your head and think that people will understand it. Write it. It doesn't have to be a 600-page strategy, from a major consulting company, which usually says nothing. It's got lots of nice graphs and charts in it. 10, 12 slides, no more, and just really give the picture of what it does. And then when you have that, the second part of this is make sure you tell everybody about it. Tell IT management about this, tell IT leadership about this with the I'm talking about the management teams, in product ownership, application development, whatever you call it, infrastructure, and so on. And the other side of this is make sure you tell the business partners about this, because the other side of this coin is they don't know how to use you. You're just another person from IT talking to them. Make sure they know what it does. And most importantly, the only acronym I use, with them. What's in it for me? And the point is that when you're explaining BRM to your business partners, don't explain it like an IT organization would explain something to business partners. Don't explain it as you would explain it to somebody at the BRM Institute. Explain it in a way that they understand, this is what I'm getting at it. This is what's in it for me. And when you can do something like that, you've positioned yourself well on both sides. The other question becomes, within IT, well, where should it work and how should it work with the rest of IT?
Right.
I'm going to answer that by telling you what it shouldn't do. And what it shouldn't do is become one of the IT organizations. So I always talk about BRM. We don't write software code. We don't chase down tickets. We don't manage projects, write specs, order laptops, and so on. There are IT groups who are very well staffed and really good at those areas that should be doing those jobs. Yet when they can't do their job because maybe they don't have enough staff or maybe they're just overburdened, BRM typically pitches in to do it. And that is one of the cardinal sins of BRM, because once you start doing that, that's the way they're going to expect you to do things from then on. And more importantly, there's a conversation around the business partner's view of BRM. Because again, even if you tell them the strategy, you're going to be known by your actions, not by your words.
Right.
And I tell you, I use a lot of quotes. When I did the keynote at the BRM Connect conference last year, I used a quote from Plato, which says, "We are what we repeatedly do." Yeah. And if you're repeatedly chasing down tickets and managing projects, that's how your business partners will see you.
Right.
And then you question why you can't get a seat at the table, because they see you as an IT manager. There's
Correct.
nothing wrong with that, but that's not what BRM ought to be doing. So we want to make sure that there's a piece for BRM, that it is truly the strategic partner, the main face of IT to the business partners. And what I always tell people in my class is, when you are with a business partner, as far as they're concerned, you're the CIO. I mean, you're not the CIO, but as far as you're concerned, you are the CIO. And therefore, you need to conduct yourself that way, which means you also need to make sure that your connection point with the rest of IT is as such, talking about strategic direction, talking about driving new opportunities, and leaving the project work for the project teams. And I'll just leave you with one last quote. It's one of my favorites that I use in the class. And it's unknown. I don't even know who said it. But it basically says, don't concern yourself with things that don't concern you. If it's not your burden, don't make it your business. Right. And I can't say that enough to BRMs who are listening, or BRM teams out there. Stop doing the things other people are doing and start making them do it. You need to focus on your role. Otherwise, you will become more of what they do.
Excellent point. And I think a lot of takeaways from that particular point. And one of the things that Tiasa says is that I just needed to hear that, Jeff. So true. Sometimes it's reassuring for people to just say that I'm glad that someone actually spoke out loudly, right? A few things on that, takeaways around reporting to the CIO, being more strategic, thinking about do things that really matter, like the kind of part of saying no to things that doesn't matter, seeing which value can you bring in. Now, one of the things that people struggle in part of it is the tactical versus strategic role, right? I mean, let's be honest. I tell this more often in my workshops. It's very difficult to think strategic when your pants are on fire. Every now and then that there's a lot of escalations going here and there, that we need to kind of fix this out. And then happens is that people have someone to douse the fire, and they become the single point of contact. So assuming that the BRMs get swarmed in these kind of activities, and if you don't have a CIO who's being more strategic, what's the kind of help that BRMs can solicit to get out of this whole vicious circle? Because everybody wants to become strategic, but there's so much work to be done on the ground because someone is not doing it. What are some of those remedial measures that people can do to step away from that vicious circle?
Yeah, quit and find another job. No, so yeah, there's that's a bit of a quandary, right? You know what the right thing is to do, and yet IT is not performing well, or IT is just performing well, but there's too many requests that are coming through and too many outages and problems they have to deal with. In other words, we as an IT organization, and BRMs should never, and I'm talking about the IT BRMs now, of course, should never forget that they're part of IT, because they are, and they have to represent IT well. But we as an IT organization are struggling to keep the lights on. Right. And so nobody wants to talk to us about innovation or about forward-thinking strategies, et cetera, if we can't even get the network to work, or get reports done on time, or projects delivered when they're supposed to. But once again, there's this something we talk about in the high-performing BRM class, is you have to get away from just this rumination of problems and staying stuck in this zone. Right. And you have to seek solutions and ways out of it. Right. So in other words, if you just accept the fact that IT doesn't perform well as a whole, and we are just stuck in this cycle of being able to just keep the lights on, you're accepting that as the status quo. And the quote I always use from Ronald Reagan is, Ronald Reagan said, status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. And so status quo is not okay, but it's not going to change unless somebody tries to change it. And if you are a BRM who really sees, I have this opportunity with our business partners, I have this opportunity in this organization to make strategic change, to make them more efficient, to find opportunities for growth and innovation, but I can't get to it because I'm stuck in this in this mess of keeping the lights on and tactical work. Well, what's your solution to get out of that? Right. Sometimes if it's kind of like, if you're in, I love the pants on fire thing, by the way, that was cool. But I use a different analogy. If you're in a boat that's got a leak you've got two choices. You can keep taking the water that leaks in and throwing it out of the boat, or you can try and fix the leak.
Right.
And so if you are just stuck in the, let's try and keep the lights on, I'm trying to do all the tactical work, so I know someday I'm going to get to it. Right. Ultimately, you're going to just keep being the person who's taking the water and just trying to throw it out of the boat. Right. But the real strong, the real top and high-performing BRMs, they're the ones that try and fix the leak. In other words, how can I get IT out of this? If it's because we're getting in too many requests, how can I figure out a way to throttle those requests and make them come in at a more reasonable pace? And that doesn't mean by creating a new intake system. That might mean making business partners aware that we can only do so much, and therefore here are the things we're investing in. So we've got to talk together about what we can do and what we can't do. A lot of times people will think the CIO ought to do that. Well, BRMs are CIOs. And therefore, you have an opportunity and a desire to be able to come up with that solution. But on the other side of the fence, it's what is it that IT is doing that we could do better? I mean, if we're constantly revisiting things, if we're not getting the right questions answered, if we're delivering solutions that don't really make a difference, well, are we really asking the right questions? Are we doing the right things? So I think BRMs are in such a great position to not only help business partners grow, but also to make IT more effective. Because if you don't make IT more effective, you will get stuck in the tactical work, either because you're going to get drafted by the CIO, whether you like it or not, to do this. I'd leave the company. Or on the business partner side, they're going to say to you, I don't really want to talk about innovation. I don't want an executive briefing. Can you just get the network to work? And you will not be invited to have that conversation. And if you want to be a BRM that gets a seat at the table, they're not going to pat you on the back because you got the network to work. So you know that you've got to get out of that role somehow. This conversation about the tactical BRM and strategic BRM sickens me, frankly. If you are a BRM, you are strategic. Is there some tactical piece of it? Of course. You can't just say, I don't do any tactical work. But your focus has to be on strategy. It's got to be on growth. It's got to be on impact. Right. And this concept of a tactical BRM, well, there are people who handle the tactical side of what happens with business partners. Don't call them BRMs. Call them whatever you like. It's a critical role. I'm not diminishing it, but it's not the role the BRM should be playing. A lot of times in organizations, we recommend the role. You can call it a service delivery manager. You can call it a technology lead. You can call it whatever you'd like, but it's almost a connection between BRM and the depth of IT. Somebody that understands business need, is working closely with the BRM team, but that can navigate IT and can also make sure that they're doing a lot of that tactical work. When you have BRMs doing tactical work, it means it's coming at the expense of the strategic work, which means you're not meeting your vision and your goals. So please stop this conversation about tactical, not you, I'm talking in general to everyone. Please stop the conversation about tactical BRMs.
I love the part that you start to look at an identity for BRM, like let's think strategic, forget about everything else. And that sets out a very clarity role of doing that. There's a lot of one of the things, and this is from TSA says, it also depends on how empowered the position of IT BRMs are in an organization, right? Sometimes it's about organization maturity and structure. Absolutely right. In how we work through it. Now let's shift gears. In terms of educating your business partners, what I've seen, Jeff, is a lot of times the business partners are not IT savvy. They don't know how this particular thing, they probably call, if something is not working, they're pretty embarrassed because of the lack of knowledge to go there and approach IT. So how do you think BRMs can establish to become the focal point about making sure that we are able to add more value in every conversation with the business partner to make their life a lot more easier? Because a lot of times they don't still don't see the value of IT. So how do you think that we BRMs can sell the value of IT in a manner that the business partners can appreciate it?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer to that is stop trying. Right. The reality is this, and this is sometimes a revelation to people. Business partners don't care about IT. Yeah. For some reason in IT, we think everybody cares about everything we do. And so we tell them about org changes and we tell them about new upgrades and standards, and they don't care. What business partners care about, let's just say it's a consumer company that we're talking about. You know what they care about? How do I attract and retain customers? How do I enter new markets? How do I improve the bottom line? How do I become more efficient? How do I create new products and services that can increase revenue? That's what they care about.
Right.
And all they want to know from you is, how can you help me do those things?
Right.
And boy, there's a ton of ways that we can. I mean, there's a lot of ways that IT can really help business partners do that. But the mindset of IT has to be around those things. Unfortunately, most IT organizations think technology first. And so they send out notes about, hey, we just upgraded the network to the latest standards. And everybody's like, I don't care. Remember, I told you I do a lot of assessments with BRM, with organizations on BRM programs. I talk to business leaders.
Right.
And I always ask, what do you think about IT? How does IT communicate? What are their communications like? And they said, I don't know. I don't read them. I said, what do you mean you don't read them? They said, I never understand them. They just tell me the network's down for some reason, or I got to spend more money. And I just don't understand them. I don't read them. Right. And this dialogue, this communication from IT to business partners has to happen in a way. And we talk a tremendous amount about empathy. There's a few people that are on this call that have been in the class, and they'll tell you, I tell them they're going to get tired of hearing me talking about empathy throughout the class, and we spend a lot of time on it. But you've got to think like your business partners, and what do they want to hear? If you were the business partner, what would you want to hear? Right. All I want to hear is, what are you doing to help me meet my goals? How are you going to help me grow? How are you going to help me make more efficient? And so when we talk about getting people to understand the value of IT, it's going to happen because we are taking actions that are going to help them. We are doing things that are going to make them better, and we're communicating it in a way that they're going to understand how it impacts them. The reality is, a lot of the things that come down from IT, and I've seen a lot of IT strategies like this, where they just talk about meaningless metrics. And when I say meaningless, I really mean meaningless to business partners. Right. You know, the number of service desk tickets that were handled within 24 hours. You know, first off, why is 24 hours such a good thing? I mean, if something's broken, they don't want to wait 24 hours. And secondly, most of those metrics are false. I've seen a lot of organizations send out, we have a 98% of them are handled within 24 hours. And you talk to business partners, like, I don't know what company they work for, but that's not the case. So IT's metrics and measurements should be devised in a way that really focuses it more on business impact. Right. And when I do performance metrics with BRM organizations, it's always focused on that. The number of projects delivered on time and on budget. You could have the worst BRM in the world and have a very high success rating because IT performed well. You could have the best BRM in the world and the metric is terrible because IT can't perform it. That's maybe an IT metric, but that's not a BRM metric. So if we want our business partners to value the impact, and I'm much more about impact than value, that IT can make, it's more about how we affected their operations, their goals, their strategies to make them better, more efficient, and grow more. That's how we do it. Unfortunately, we try to make them learn our language and respect us for what we think we do. I don't know other organizations. You know, marketing doesn't work that way in an organization.
Sure.
You know, supply chain doesn't. It's always about the business. Yet for some reason in IT, we just focus more on us, which is a mistake.
Right. I mean, that's a very comprehensive statement. I mean, we talk about this watermelon syndrome. Everything looks green outside as a watermelon. The moment I open up the watermelon, it's bleeding red. The customer is simply bleeding. Just because we measure the wrong metric, because IT measures things that are very comfortable for them, because it's kind of putting a badge of honor and say that we did a great job, but you did a lousy job because we didn't increase any sales and stuff. Yeah. It's very interesting, Jeff. I had a board meeting when one of the CIO came in and he presented his quarterly business review, and he said 99.99% availability met. The customer satisfaction survey is saying about 90% are promoters of this one, so everybody gives a thunderous applause. 15 minutes into the conversation, the CEO says, sorry guys, we have a bad news. We lost 11% customers in the last quarter. And it's a pin drop silence, right? I mean, just ask us a tape of, are you just fudging data? Or are you just measuring the wrong metrics?
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
make any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a question from our participant here. Most organizations allocate business guys in this role who may not have the right basic technology background to do their job. Basically, they're saying about BRM roles. How do you politically push tech mentoring education to these BRMs so that they can effectively do their job? And what has been your experience for people who don't have tech background and being part of IT?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. First off, it's not just guys, it's women too. Don't forget that.
Right. Sure.
Not to be politically correct. Yeah. So It's really interesting. When I was leading the BRM program, my former company, and this is a while ago, I started out with people from IT, and I took the people that I thought would be best to do this, and we were struggling because a lot of them, yeah, they were technically sound, but they weren't able to speak to business people the way that they should, like business people. They weren't thinking business first. They were answering things very technically. Despite how much you talk to them, it's the way their mind worked. And who can blame them? That's where they came from. So I switched that a little bit. I said, you know what? Let me try hiring from the business. And I did. I hired a few from business partners. And boy, it was night and day. They were great working with the business partners. They understood direction, strategies, and where it needs to go. The problem was they didn't know anything about technology. And I figured, all right, I can teach them a technology. I came from IT, so I can teach it to them or get somebody to do that. But the problem was that I found that a lot of people that came from the business side of things, I know people don't like using that term, were intimidated by the technology and very intimidated by the people in IT that spoke to them. And if you ever listen to an IT expert speak to someone, it's not that they're arrogant or mean. They're not. They're usually trying to help. But the language that they use, the words that they use, assume that you know what they're talking about. And when you're doing something along those lines, you're afraid, if you're coming from the business side, you're almost afraid to ask a question like, I should know that, so I'm not going to ask. And they get very intimidated. I mean, again, we talk in the class quite a bit about using business words and business terminology, and yet we talk about servers.
Right.
And we all think everybody knows what a server is. Go ask your business partners if they know what a server is. They don't, but they keep nodding their head because you're telling them the server's down or something like that. So I think if you're, what I realized was it doesn't matter whether it comes from the business side or the IT side. It's about, what the person has in their head and their hearts, their ability to grow, their desire to grow in this, their desire to learn. And, it's the things sometimes you can't teach to people because there are the things that you can teach to them. But if you are getting someone in from the business side, I always had the thought that when I hired a BRM, I didn't have them doing BRM work for at least a month. And I had them learn. Good CEOs, when they go to a new company, don't start as CEO Monday. They go on a listening tour and a learning tour, and they get themselves acclimated. I strongly recommend that for BRMs. Learn about the business partners, learn about the company and the culture. And most importantly, learn about technology. Send them to a class, have them talk to IT experts on the side, whatever it might be. And don't expect that, you're going to learn everything right from the beginning. It's things are going to take time to learn. So, this concept of continuous learning, continuous development for high performers is critical. It's important, critical for anybody. But when you get the sense that, you know what, I've been with this company for 20 years, I know what everybody does, you're fooling yourself. You may know at a very high level, but you don't know the depth. The same thing goes on the IT side. Even if you come from IT, it's the same thing. But if you're from the business side, how would you teach somebody about IT and start mentoring them and finding ways for them to develop and learn? Because I think that's what's ultimately going to be needed for them.
Right. Absolutely. Great thought. And I hope that answered the question from the user. Now, one of the questions that we all struggle is what skills and competencies do you think is the BRM should be equipped to perform the role to be at the best, right? So there's a lot of mixed school thoughts about what they need to acquire. So from your experience, Jeff, someone is stepping up into the role of a BRM. What kind of competencies, skills, and mindsets? Let's talk a little bit about mindsets because you're very passionate about how much mindsets can make a difference for people to know, just to validate whether they could be qualified to be a BRM or not.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's not one that's answered within like 3 minutes. It's a big discussion. I think the way I can answer this is, when we talk about the high performing BRM class, the first session of the high performing BRM class is called the DNA of a high performing BRM, and it talks about the characteristics, the competencies, and the actions that high performers exhibit and take, and it focuses on there's 8 characteristics, from empathy to collaboration, adaptability, reliability, trust and integrity. There are a lot of things that are critical for BRMs to be successful in this role. And what's ironic is it's not like you can look at that list and say, well, I don't do 3 of these well, so I'm not cut out to BRM. All of them you can develop if you want to. Creativity is one, for instance. You can develop your creative capabilities. So it's, again, this desire to improve and to see yourself differently. So when you talk about a mindset shift, it's understanding what those characteristics and competencies are. And by the way, if you notice, I didn't mention anything academic there. I didn't say memorizing a chart or a table, understanding which templates to use. This is not that kind of a role. It's not a process, do step 1, then step 2, then step 3. It's an executive type role. And you have to look at your CIO and see how he or she works and think you've got to operate the same way. And so when you're working as in the BRM field, your mindset has to be that I'm the CIO. I am an executive. I don't care what your title is. I am an executive, and work on your executive presence. And when I say executive presence, I'm not talking about wearing a nice suit and having good posture, although those are important. I'm talking about making people feel your presence in a room, moving a conversation forward, having something to say. Those are some of the things. Your mindset you have to believe in yourself in this role. If you have a desire just to be a liaison between IT and the business, then go ahead and do that somewhere, but don't try and fool yourself to think that you're a BRM. If you want to be a BRM, you're an executive. You are somebody that is empowered to and has almost a mandate to make an impact and a difference. As such, your mindset has to believe that you're an executive. You have to be very empathetic. You have to be forward thinking. You got to be a thought leader. You've got to make sure that you're adaptable. You can understand things. You have to have strong business acumen. I mean, I can go on and on with this. But the funny thing is, I call BRM the hardest easy role you'll ever have. So while I'm telling you've got to think about all these things, and it sounds so daunting, it's really not. It's common sense. It's just a matter of honing your skills in the areas that really need to be developed and focusing on yourself as an executive rather than a tactician. It can be very, very powerful when you're able to do that.
Yeah, that's a great way to put things around in terms of the 8 attributes, and I definitely recommend High Performing BRM workshop from Jeff. He's passionate about doing this. Now, Jeff, I'm going to be playing a devil's advocate here.
Oh boy.
Well, at one end, we look at high performing BRM, but I have a notion that it's very difficult to sustain high performing BRMs because they're looking out for new changes, new things to push them hard and motivate them and stuff like that. So what do you kind of balance between someone who is not a high performing BRM, they just do their work to do it, or will we rely on having a high performing team to run the show? Because I'm just worried that the high performing BRM might not continue with me. They would have better opportunities to step away to do other roles. So how do I need to build a team, particularly if I'm a BRM leader, as I'm looking at not just building people, but also making them retain in this organization for a long period of time, the talent retention and making sure that we all work together?
So first off, and it's a great question, and thank you for playing devil's advocate. I always get worried when people say that because I never know where it's going. But that's a great question. And I would say if that was you, and I know it wasn't you saying that, if that was you saying, I've got to be careful making them high performers because I need to keep my team together, then you are a very selfish business leader. Because your goal ought to be to make people so good that they do want to leave. There's a great cartoon that shows the CEO and the CFO talking, and they're talking about training, and the CFO said, what if we train them and they become so good that they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Exactly.
Right? So I can tell you the BRM team I had at my former company, one of them became a brand manager for a major brand in Canada. One of them is the CIO at a major healthcare organization. One of them started their own company in another field, and they're the CEO of that. And others have gone on to bigger and better roles. That's great. And when you're in the BRM role, you're getting such incredible training and visibility, just like a CIO would. Your marketability goes through the roof. Now, if you're a manager, you are worried, I want to keep this team together. So the first thing is give them something to really make them feel that they're making a difference, that there's something new to chew on. When the role gets very static, people are going to get bored and they're going to want to look for new challenges and they're going to want to leave. But when the role is constantly challenging, when there's new challenges each day, new endeavors, new opportunities, and they're learning and growing, people usually don't want to leave that. Now, again, it's great if they do, if they're going on to something bigger and better, different field. But you're not going to stop that anyway. What you are going to control, though, is the people who are going to leave your team to go to work for another BRM organization because you're giving them a lot of fulfillment and you're giving them some challenges. And so when we're looking at the good versus the great, the good BRMs are doing value plans, they're building relationships, they're managing demand. That's fun for the first 3 months. And after a while, it's like just the same thing over and over again. I'm not really making a difference.
Right.
When you start doing things like becoming a thought leader, when you start finding opportunities for innovation, when you start doing journey mapping and identify ways to make groups more efficient, when you start finding ways to leverage technology across business partners, when you start really affecting the bottom line of an organization and really making an impact, each day you go to work, there's something new to do and there's something more. And remember, high performers, the ones you really want in this role, they're doing it for the money like we all are. They're doing it for the prestige as we all are. But they're also doing it because they want fulfillment. They want to know that they're making a difference. And if they're making a difference, they're not going to want to go anywhere until they find a different opportunity or a better opportunity. But if you're a good manager, that's what you want. It's like your kids. You want to give them the best chance for success and then hope that they make the right decisions going forward. And if they go somewhere else to do it, you got to be happy for them. So, the focus is more on them. And remember, it's just like the CEO and the CFO. What if we don't train them and they stay? You really want to turn them into high performers for that reason.
Great thought again on the part. I love these analogies and quotes. Now, one of the things that I've seen BRMs come back and say, sometimes it's a thankless job, right? We do all the hard work, and if everything works well, they say that the team did it, and if something goes off, blame it on the BRM. So sometimes you need to have some thick skin of running this whole show. So what do you think about resilience and the fact that people can still be motivated in spite of not getting the credit? I always tell that if you don't worry about the credit, then there's no problem. But in reality, everybody wants to get a share of it. How do you play that?
Yeah, so I tell people that as far as I'm concerned, and I've played a lot of roles in IT, from again a developer to a manager to I used to write IT strategy. I headed up an e-business area. I headed up an innovation lab, and then headed up the BRM team over my career. When I used to talk about this, I told people looking back at my career, by far, not even close, this was the most fulfilling, enjoyable, and wonderful role. It was also the most frustrating, painful, and heart-wrenching role I've had. So literally Monday afternoon or Monday evening, you can go home and think, wow, I just conquered the world. This is great. I really enjoy this. And then Tuesday you go home thinking, I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And that's just the reality of the way business works. One day is great. The next day might not be so great. And you've got to understand and stay balanced, keep that balance within you to know that, the good times are never as good as they seem and the bad times are never as bad. But to maximize those good feelings, feel good about what you've done. And when the bad comes along, it's just address the problem and try and get it back to normal. So, what's really ironic and why I started to smile was most people in IT that see BRM resent BRM because BRMs get credit for things that IT does. And they do. If IT does a lot of work on this major project and it's really cutting edge, delivered on time and on budget, typically the BRM is having a meeting with a senior executive who's saying, you guys did great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful. You did terrific. And the people in IT resent that. It's like, I should be getting the credit. And I remember having this conversation with IT leaders, some of my colleagues when I was at the industry, my peers, and they say, you guys always get credit for things that we do. And I say, that's very true. We always make sure that they're aware that you do it. They say, yeah, but that's not enough. I said, yeah, but something else, when you guys screw up, guess who gets yelled at? And that's us. Because when, being the face of IT, being viewed as the CIO, that's good and bad, right? So there are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days. You have to learn how to, first off, accept that ownership and that accountability, Don't say, well, they screwed up if it's something went wrong. Explain why it happened and work with IT to make sure it doesn't happen again. And when things go really well, make sure you're giving credit to the people that actually did that. So it's kind of goes both ways. And think of your CIO. Your CIO is being brought into meetings where he or she is getting yelled at for things that they didn't even know happened. But they also are getting congratulated when the strategies are reached because of IT's ability to do it. So you've got to have a thick skin. You've got to really not let your emotions get you the best of you, and just take a step back, assess the situation, what's really going on, and how do I make it better, or how do I continue what's going on and make sure others get credit.
Awesome point. So we have about 10 minutes to go. So if you have any questions, do post on the chat window, and we're going to kind of bring it up to Jeff to see how much questions he can answer. He's on a roller coaster to answer all these questions to see how much we can fit in that 1 hour. Let me give you one of the other questions that we get challenged as BRMs is there seems to be politics in every organization. So how do we handle politics, and how do we make that not affect us in our work? Because somewhere someone has a different part of what isn't for me. So what would you say for someone who gets sandwiched between the organizational politics to be aware, and how do they tackle this?
Yeah, so organizational politics, like it or not, are there. They exist. And the first thing is recognition that there are organizational politics. The second is awareness that not only that there are, but what they are, and how they fluctuate, because organizational politics aren't always clear and consistent throughout the organization. Many times organizational politics will fluctuate between business partners, different days of the week, different scenarios, et cetera. So the BRM needs to be savvy enough to be aware of what those politics are and how they play out in different situations, and how to deal with them. But what's interesting about the politics is you're not going to, more than likely, affect their existence. The organization is much bigger than a single person. So it's a matter, when I talk about awareness, part of it is understanding. But the second part of that is, what are you going to do about it? And this goes back to this concept of meaningful relationships.
Right.
One of the things that I'm trying to campaign against is this overuse of the word relationships. We use it way too much. We talk about, and again, relationships being what we do.
Right.
We build relationships, we foster relationships, relationship-centered organization, relationshipism. I'm trying to think of all the different words that are used throughout the industry on relationships. I'm not saying relationships are bad. They're good. They're important. But relationships are important for everybody. They're important for BRMs. They're important for marketers, for people in supply chain, people who work in field offices. I mean, you name it. Every job is built around relationships, internal and external relationships. So we do ourselves a disservice when we talk about relationships as the core of what we do. I don't need an organization to build relationships. I don't understand why we keep telling CIOs this. But throw the word meaningful in front of it, and now it's something different. Because if you understand your role as a BRM, you understand your role as an executive, and the ability to change what BRMs do, you understand that for me to do that, I need to have a meaningful relationship with the person on the other side of the table. Right. And a meaningful relationship is one that benefits them and benefits me as well. But it's something that we can do. So, I always tell people in my classes, when I talk about this, that I have a relationship with all 15 of you or all 20 of you. Right. Is it meaningful for either one of us? No, not yet. But you have to look to build that meaningful relationship. And we talk a lot about the human aspect of relationships, connecting with human beings and not suits or titles or roles or offices. And when you can build that meaningful relationship, people see that you understand them, you understand their world, your focus is on making them better and helping them, and that they have a little bit of responsibility to you, and now you're working in a symbiotic way with them. It's a way, again, politics aren't going to change, but it's a way of diffusing the politics a little bit, because now you're not going to get swept up in that wave as much. You have this connection with a person, so you can have a conversation about what happened, how to get around it, without necessarily having to put that spin on it because of the politics. So I think one of the ways that you're able to navigate the organizational politics is awareness. One of the other ways is by building enough strong and meaningful relationships with people that when they do come around, that you're going to be able to have a more meaningful conversation and not get swept up in what the political nature of that conversation was.
Great. There's a comment from Tiasa saying that responsibilities that come with this role can have extreme impacts, highly rewarding or heavily stressed. But what makes it exciting is the adrenaline in adding value when you're able to make an impact on either side. Absolutely true. Thanks for sharing that, Tiasa.
Yep.
Now, my final one on this question is on purpose. We have been focusing on purpose. So a lot of times we struggle between individual purpose and organization purpose. So if a BRM is kind of stepping into an organization, how do these two play a vital role in telling them to get out of this bed every morning on a Monday morning saying that, yes, I'm going to do this work. I'm pumped up to do this work. So how do we do this correlation of the personal purpose with organization purpose? Is there any kind of ways that we should think about as a BRM?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and again, I'm going back to the section of the class called developing meaningful relationships. When we talk about building meaningful relationships, the first part of that class is on you. Knowing who you are, knowing who you want to be, what is your purpose, etc. Because it has to start there. I mean, ultimately, if you're working for an organization, your purpose has to align with what the organizational purpose is in some way, shape, or form. The example I always use is, the vegetarian in the slaughterhouse. If you're a vegetarian and you work for a slaughterhouse, somehow your purpose is not going to align and you're never really going to be very happy. So there has to be a connection between your individual purpose and the organizational purpose. But the first thing is you have to know what your purpose is. And a lot of people say, oh, I know what my purpose is, and then they can recite it. Well, that's what is on the surface. That's usually a result of what your job description says, what your boss told you to do, and so on and so forth. But take the time and really think about who you are and what your purpose is. Once you've done that, it's a matter of connecting with the other side, which is a person, a department, an organization, about what's their purpose. And where are they going and where are they headed? And then the big question is, how do these two align? Are they aligned? And if they're off a little bit, it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. But just to understand that they're off a little bit, adjust if you can. But if you can't adjust, then just be aware that there's a different connection between where you want to go and where you want to do and what the organization is doing. And then figure out the best way to address that. And if it's diametrically opposed, meaning your purpose is one way and your organization is going a different way, you've really got to question whether or not you're going to be successful there. I'm not telling anybody to quit their jobs. I mean, there's other factors that go into getting a job. But if you're really focusing on purpose, you really have to be somewhat connected with what the purpose and the direction is of the organization. And once you're able to do that, then it's a matter of aligning those things and trying to make sure that you're definitely there to help drive and fulfill organizational purpose, but don't forget about yourself. You're there to drive and affect your purpose as well and make sure that you're being fulfilled on something other than a paycheck. Because when you just go into a job for a paycheck, you almost don't want to wake up in the morning and go there.
Sure. There's one question for you is, I heard Jeff about the BRM program. How does the BRM program look like? What are the basic topics or subjects to cover in a BRM? But that will be the last question for us to cover in that next 2 minutes. But go ahead and tell them.
Is this BRM program meaning a BRM program in an organization? Are we talking about the high performing BRM class? Which one are we talking about? Basic topics and subjects?
Yeah. So if you can just add it, tell them about what is specific, that'll help. But I think let's talk a little bit about the high performing BRM, because I think you've been doing a lot of work and pioneering effort on that, Jeff. So for people who would like to know a little bit more about the high performing BRM, is that they have to have basic credentials to go to the high performing BRM, like BRMP, CBRM, or do you think anybody is playing? So give us a little bit of a background of who is entitled to go through that high performing BRM and how they can enroll in your upcoming classes.
Yeah, sure. I built the class for BRMs or new to the role or veterans to learn how to do this role. There's a lot of good education in the industry that teaches you a lot of the foundational topics or the specific templates or processes or things to consider, but nowhere do we teach people how to do this. And that's why the class came about. But I'm not just trying to teach people how to do it, I'm trying to teach them to do it in a very effective and high level way. It's a 3-day in-person class, a 5-day virtual class. I'm actually doing one right after this. We're doing a virtual one this week. And it covers, the first topic is the DNA of a high performer. The second topic is on how do you develop meaningful relationships. We do a topic on the critical skills that are important for BRMs to understand and to master, around executive presence, influential communications, time management, and so on. Then we spend there's a section called making an impact, and I could call that executing the role, but we spend a lot of time on that and talking about the 4 stages to use to really do this role and do it very well at a high level. And then the last section is really on driving opportunity, that after you're doing this job at a high level and you're influencing strategies, operations, and performance, how do you find and drive new opportunity in the organization? Because as a BRM, you see business and technology in a way that nobody else does. How can you drive opportunity in your organization? If anybody's interested in the class, you can go to my website, which is barkleyconsultinggroup.com, and just take a look at the high performing BRM. I'm happy to share the link. Thank you, Brian. Brian's in the class this week.
Yeah. We also have people like Mark who had attended.
Mark is there too.
He says high performing BRM class and was excellent. Thanks, Mark, for sharing, because it's important. And Jeff, you've been.
And the other thing is, if you're interested, it's also on the BRM. I do this in coordination with the BRM Institute, so it's on their website as well. If you want to sign up there too for we hold public classes on individuals sign up every 2 months. Love to have you there.
So thank you so much, Jeff, for your meaningful insights. It was a fireside chat conversations. It just flew away. 1 hour just flew away. I think our viewers enjoyed the whole thing. So if you really enjoyed the session with Jeff, please put it on the chat window on the comment section, because we need to really know whether it was an impactful, because I got plenty of insights in that 1 hour, and I wish that you also had that moving forward. We really appreciate you taking time in spite of your class. I know that we had to schedule something pretty early for you, but really appreciate Jeff for sharing a lot of valuable content and practical takeaways.
It was my pleasure. Suresh, thank you for having me, and everyone on there, good luck to you all in your endeavors. Let us know how we can help.
And we'll all see you at BRM Connect in Portland. So please remember that we will be there at BRM Connect in Portland, so you can catch up with Jeff and me and other fellow BRMs. And I look forward to seeing all in the days to come. So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned, and we will see you in the next 2 weeks with another topic from TaUB Solutions. Thank you very much.